Here we are again. Morning. Uh, September 1 is gone. That was yesterday. Um, that means today is September 2. It's numeric. 1, 2. You can feel the cool air coming in the window. A relief. So, there's a million things to talk about, but I want to get one thing out. It's an interesting story that started in the early 90s. I'm wearing my Fillmore hat, which now Fillmore East, which was on 2nd Avenue and 6th Street, is now a bank entrance where you can get cash from a cash machine, as opposed to when we saw the Allman Brothers in 1971, which was right up the street from the bagel place. So the Allman Brothers obviously are now gone. Greg, more recently. So in the early 90s, when the internet was still small compared to what it grew into, I was doing some outside provider work for IBM. And they were experimenting with animation online and what people would watch and how long their attention span would be and how they would react to different subject matter. And it blossomed into a very interesting study. But eventually I was working on an animation project, not for IBM, but for myself. It was my own project entitled The Codger Twins, and it was a very simple little story of twin elderly brothers who lived in twin towers, and everybody who lived in twin towers were twins. And as you went up the floors of the tower, the animation with which they were articulated would become more complex. But one of the powers behind the twin towers was fractal mathematics. And fractal mathematics is the study of how self-similar repetition builds into reality. So if you look at a river stream, or you look at a coastline, or you look at a tree, or you look at leaves, or you look at the veins in the body, everything replicates itself many times in a self-similar way until it becomes something. And there was a guy who got to the basic principles of fractal mathematics called Dr. Benoit Mandelbrot. And everyone's heard his name because of the Mandelbrot set, which is an incredibly beautiful dynamic of a fractal iteration turned into a graphic. So you can take mathematics and you can assign it to graphics and get imagery, and the imagery from fractal mathematics is incredible. They often use it to radiate toward you in psychedelic, well, from the 60s would be called acid trip. Wow, man. Okay. That's Dr. Benoit Mandelbrot. Well, Dr. Benoit Mandelbrot came up with a formula, an equation, a way in which to get fractal mathematics to iterate into things like coastlines and trees and whatever, and unbelievably beautiful graphics. So I was working on this concept of the Codger Twins, and I thought I could power all of the physical objects except the Codger Twins with fractal mathematics, which meant that the entire environment in the entire apartment building was virtual math, which was not state. In other words, it could change. So it was interactive fractals, like a couch that knew you were close by, or a table that knew you were sitting near it. Well, somehow Dr. Mandelbrot got word of that project through the IBM thing. And IBM has what's called the IBM T.J. Watson Research Center in Armonk, New York. It is a place where the most outstanding mathematicians and scientists of various disciplines are housed where they do their residency research in the T.J. Watson. And it's an amazing place. And I suddenly got an invitation to visit with Dr. Mandelbrot. And I'm like, oh, that's weird. So I went. And I got to tell you something, T.J. Watson, it's so, first of all, it's unbelievably beautiful. They cleverly enough, they built the whole thing in tiny angle increments to create a curve to the entire building. So the curve is a self-similar iteration in very tiny increments. And inside is probably the most delicious, what you would see is it looks like a cafeteria, but it's got chefs. And in other words, they have chefs on duty to serve the mathematicians and scientists the most amazing food you can imagine. And this was in like 1995, and the prices would be like 1947. You could order what would be a $40 meal in New York City. You could order for like $2.50. Well, I met with Dr. Mandelbrot, and he's a very difficult, well, he was, he's no longer with us. He was a very difficult man in many, many ways. And in order to deal with people, they had a nuclear physicist as his assistant. And the nuclear physicist's job was to help someone communicate with Dr. Mandelbrot, because Dr. Mandelbrot is that difficult to communicate with. So we got down to talking, and after a while, I got into an argument with him because I didn't agree with some of his applications. You're not going to disagree with Dr. Mandelbrot's mathematics of fractals. It took me weeks to even figure out how to do the equations. I had newspaper print all over my studio doing all these equations like I was a physicist. Okay. But I didn't agree with his application. I'm not going to get into that. It's technical. But it had to do with the stock market and how the stock market acts. And I said, you can't apply fractal mathematics to the stock market. So we had an argument. During the argument, I had to get the nuclear physicist out of the way because he was getting very upset because Dr. Mandelbrot was getting very aggressive. I got him out of the way. Okay, here we go. After several meetings with Dr. Mandelbrot saw my video and he said, you're using metaphor and analogy for fractal mathematics. And I said, yes, because all the things that people don't understand about math and science, if you tell it to them in a metaphor, they get it. And he went, well, we have a building full of mathematicians and scientists, and people don't understand what they're talking about, and getting funding and getting research and being able to lecture is difficult because nobody understands them. I said, well, all they have to do is use metaphor and analogy. Suddenly, I was guest speaker at T.J. Watson Research Center, and I find myself in a room full of the world's most outstanding mathematicians and scientists in the world. And I told them, I said, look, you guys, we can't understand what you're thinking about, even if you tried to tell us what you're thinking about. We can't think on those levels. That's why you're here. There's only so many people who can think like that. But if you tell them a story and you use an analogy, they'll go, oh, wow, I never thought of that. So I showed them my animation. They went nuts. They stood up and came over to me and started pulling on my shirt, literally thanking me with some with tears in their eyes. The director of the TJ had to round them up. Some of them were wandering in the hallway, staring at the ceiling and talking to themselves. They had to be gotten back into their cubicles to think because they were so excited. And it took 15 minutes to get them to settle down after I did my presentation. There's an epilogue to this, and I don't know if I have the time to tell the epilogue. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause for a moment, and then we might delete the epilogue, but it'll be on here, and we may delete it or add it later because there is an epilogue, and it's worth telling. So let's stop this now, and we'll figure it out.